Okay, hello. In this section, we're going to talk a little about sociological theory, and in particular, the three basic theories which we need to look at and keep in mind as we're going through this whole course. These are the ways of, or the perspective, the lenses, which sociologists use to understand the functions and the influences of society. And generally speaking, of course, there's one dichotomy, meaning there's one way of splitting it into two, and there are three different types of general modes of view. The dichotomy, the splitting of two, would be the macrosociology and the microsociological focus, where the macro looks at the large-scale conditions that affect behavior, such as industrialization, globalization, urbanization, demographic trends, things which affect the whole society as a large, different types of economic functions. On the other hand, there is microsociology, which would affect how interpersonal behaviors are integrated and affected by social functions, sociological trends and things like that. So for instance, if urbanization will shape social interactions, how much are you going to pay attention to something which goes on in the subway? Strangely enough, it's not that it's that you can find that people will change their pants on the subway, and the people around them will ignore them, or most people will ignore them. Why does that happen? If you're going to do that in another society, if you're going to change your pants in the middle of Amman, Jordan, you're probably not going to be ignored, especially if you're female. So there are obvious societal differences which affect that personal interaction. But the three basic, that's one dichotomy that we have to keep in mind that is there. But even more important than that, we have the three theoretical perspectives. And these three theoretical perspectives are extremely important because these are the lenses which are used throughout sociology and based on the people who we mentioned in the previous lectures. And this is the functionalist perspective, the conflict perspective, and the symbolic interaction perspective. So let's go over these one at a time. So the functionalist perspective means a functionalist question, which asks. But think of it this way: a society works as an organic whole. Somehow or another, the society works to preserve itself as a society, which means in order for that to happen, that each part of the society has to serve a function in keeping that as a functioning organic whole. Just as sort of like in a body, you have to have different parts of your body functioning to do other things, right? You need to have a skeletal system, and a nervous system, and a cardiovascular system, and a respiratory system, etc. All these different systems which have specific purposes and functions. And the eye is there to see, and the tongue is there to speak and to taste, etc. So different parts of the society are there in function in order to keep the society as a functional whole. And the purpose of this mode of inquiry is to understand what each part of the society or trend or behavior on the macro level keeps the society as functioning as it is. In other words, it's sort of what it does to keep the society together as a functioning whole. Or what does this particular action do to maintain the society as it was? Now, there are different types of functions, though. because functions are not necessarily, you know, just the way we think of it. There's, you know, if we have a new a new societal trend or development, there are things which we expect it to happen, sometimes we don't expect it to happen. There are positives, there are negatives, right, in anything that you want to do. And this is just the nature of the world. So we have names for that. Okay, first of all, we have what's called the manifest functions and the latent functions. A manifest function means that which is manifest, means open, identifiable. We know about it from beforehand. This is the type of function that if you are going to have some sort of innovation, this is the innovation which you're expecting it to have as a positive, as a positive change. So, for instance, if we're going to talk about the advent of public schools, and we decided someplace along in our history, we decided to have public schools. Okay, and why? Because we wanted to make sure that the children were going to be able to get the skills they needed in order to be contributing members of the society. So we instituted the public schools so even anybody, regardless of their income, will be able to go to school and learn the skills they need in order to get a job and be a functioning member of society. Okay, of course that was needed because they was no longer being apprenticed to become a artisan from the home, so and they needed to have the skills in order to go out and work outside the home. So that was the manifest function. Okay. A latent function. In other words, they now learn reading, writing, arithmetic in order to get a job. What would be a latent function of public schools? Okay. Well, the latent function might be that it certainly was at one point. The latent function, positive change that it did was to socialize children into the American life. When we had the immigrants coming and we had public education, and that public education allowed immigrants to integrate faster into the American society. So that was a latent function, although it wasn't really the manifest function wasn't a function that was the purpose of the public education. It certainly was another function that was helpful. Okay, so that would be a manifest function and a latent function, both positive contributions to society. Okay, but not all contributions and functions are positive. Sometimes the functions are negative. Right? So one of the manifest dysfunctions, right, would be an anticipated disruption to the social order. Okay? So, in other words, a manifest, well, let's take the one in the book. A manifest dysfunction of cell phones. Right? In other words, something that it's really obvious that if cell phones we have to bring people closer together, texting even more so, one of the problems that has to be addressed immediately is people texting while they're driving or using cell phones while they're driving. That's really a problem. And it's manifest, it's right out there in front. Right? So either we deal with it or we don't deal with it, and actually what they do is they make laws against it. What about a latent dysfunction? Something that we didn't think about when we're making the cell phones, or didn't think about when they're making the public education. A latent dysfunction of public education was that it separated children, parents, from the educational process. So parents became alienated from their children. And parents have less control over their children and their children's education, their children's upbringing. And that disconnect brings with it many other dysfunctions, or the latent dysfunction of cell phones is the toxic waste that it produces. So the dysfunctions also, and these are really important ideas, that within the functional perspective, you're going to look at the different types of functions that one would have from a social change. Fluoridization, for instance, to put fluoride into, that's a big question. Many different changes that one might have. Changing the age of legal drinking, or when Nixon closed off the border from in 1967 from the import of marijuana from Mexico. What happened then? So you had, obviously, the idea was to cut off the import of marijuana from Mexico. And what happened, though? As a result, other drugs from other places went in, particularly heroin came in, which was a latent dysfunction. Wasn't expected. So these are the type of things that one will look at from the functionalist perspective. And this, comes from the ideas that we had before from Durkheim and Weber, in particular, that they would be their ways of thinking developed into the functionalist perspective. Marx, on the other hand,